You are trying to fix a wound that has been shaping your entire world without your permission. Every attempt to heal becomes another reminder that something inside you has already fractured beyond recognition. What if every step toward recovery only reveals how far you have yet to fall? You learned early that the world rewards the appearance of strength more than the truth of suffering. Psychologists call it emotional suppression, a survival strategy that becomes a prison. You say, "I'm fine," because the alternative feels humiliating, messy, dangerous. Each time you swallow your pain, you silence the parts of you begging to be acknowledged. The lie becomes a habit, and the habit becomes an identity. Now the mask fits so tightly, you barely remember what it hides. Healing demands honesty, but honesty threatens everything you built just to stay alive. If you remove the mask, who will recognize the face beneath? Worse, will you? What if "I'm fine" stopped being a shield a long time ago and became the deepest wound of all? Would you dare to speak without it? Developmental psychologists call it attachment hunger. You grew up rationing affection like scarce oxygen, learning that love must be earned, that safety is conditional, that attention disappears the moment you need it most. Healing asks you to soothe the child within you who still believes they are unworthy of care. Yet how do you comfort a younger self who only knows neglect as normal? You try self-compassion, but the words feel foreign, like speaking a language no one ever taught you. You keep searching for validation in others, desperate for someone to finally give what was withheld. Every unreturned message, every delayed response, every subtle rejection drops you back into the old emptiness. The body remembers what the mind denies. If healing means giving yourself what you never received, how do you start when you have no idea what love is supposed to feel like? Would you recognize it if it arrived? Self-awareness is praised as transformation, yet psychologists warn that introspection often magnifies self-criticism. When you look inward, the mirror doesn't reflect who you are, only who you fear you might be. Every flaw becomes a threat. Every weakness becomes a prophecy. You dissect yourself relentlessly, hoping analysis will grant absolution. Instead, you find 1,000 reasons to believe you are broken. You read books, listen to experts, take personality tests, as if a label could fix what has long felt unnameable. Healing demands that you see yourself clearly, yet clarity feels like exposure, and exposure feels like danger. You turn away again, pretending the mirror lies. What if the truth you are terrified to face is not that you are damaged, but that you were never allowed to believe you were whole? Would you dare to look long enough to find out? You call them habits, yet they are really maladaptive coping mechanisms dressed as comfort. Doom scrolling to numb the ache, overworking to avoid the silence, starving or stuffing your body to feel in control of something, anything. You cling to distractions that slowly consume the very life you are trying to save. Every unhealthy behavior once served a purpose, a desperate adaptation when you lacked better tools. The tragedy is that your mind never updated the instructions. It keeps trying to protect you from dangers that no longer exist, turning safety into sabotage. You know these patterns harm you, yet they feel familiar, almost soothing. Ruin disguised as relief. Pain you can predict feels safer than healing you cannot trust. If you let go of the coping that destroys you, what remains of the person who survived thanks to it? Would you still know how to exist without your own undoing? You crave connection, yet the moment someone looks too closely, panic rises like a siren. Therapists call it vulnerability avoidance. The closer love gets, the louder the instinct to hide. You push people away with silence, sarcasm, or sudden distance, terrified that intimacy will expose the parts of you you've buried. Healing requires letting others witness your truth, yet your survival brain still insists that exposure equals danger. You dream of being understood, yet the idea of someone actually understanding you feels unbearable. The result is a paradox, longing for closeness while rehearsing abandonment. You tell yourself you prefer isolation, but loneliness stalks you like a shadow. If someone truly saw you, every scar and unfinished piece, would they stay? Or would you be the first to run? Psychologists call it cognitive dissonance. You cling to two opposing beliefs that both feel true. I deserve better, and I am the reason I am hurting. The mind becomes a courtroom where you are the prosecutor and the accused, the victim and the perpetrator. You overthink every decision, terrified of choosing wrong, chasing a certainty that reality will never provide. You question your emotions, your memories, your worth, until doubt becomes your only reliable companion. Healing demands trust in yourself, yet trust feels like a luxury you have not earned. So you keep negotiating with the judge inside your skull, begging for permission to exist. The verdict never arrives. If you cannot rely on your own mind to protect you, how do you know which thoughts are the warnings and which are the weapons? Would you ever dare to choose a side? Trauma researchers explain that the nervous system remembers what the conscious mind tries to forget. A sudden sound, a shift in tone, a look that lingers too long, and your body reacts before you understand why. Healing asks you to return to the scenes that rewrote your development. Yet every flashback drags you back into a past that refuses to stay chronological. You call yourself irrational, dramatic, unstable, when in truth, the brain is doing exactly what it was trained to do: protect you at all costs. You learn to survive danger by anticipating it everywhere. Safety feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar feels unsafe. The world applauds resilience, never realizing what resilience costs. If your body no longer knows the difference between living and reliving, how can you ever trust a moment that doesn't hurt? Would calmness always feel like the silent seconds before impact? Clinical psychology names it internalized shame. You carry the conviction that suffering is the correct price for existing. Every mistake becomes evidence. Every flaw becomes a sentence. Instead of questioning why you hurt, you question why you dare to want anything more than the hurt. Self-improvement becomes self-flagellation. Perfectionism disguised as discipline. Exhaustion disguised as effort. You measure your value by productivity, obedience, silence. The moment you rest, guilt crawls in, whispering that stillness is a crime. You crave healing, yet you sabotage progress because a small voice insists you haven't earned relief. You believe pain is justice. You believe healing is theft. You believe you must keep paying if every part of you is convinced that relief would be stealing something you do not deserve. How would you ever allow yourself to heal? Would you choose freedom if the chains feel like your only proof of worth? Therapists call it healing fatigue. The relentless pressure to grow, improve, evolve turns recovery into another battlefield. You consume endless advice journaling, meditation, affirmations, hoping one ritual will finally unlock the version of you that isn't drowning. Every morning becomes a new attempt at resurrection. Every night, another quiet failure. You wonder why the progress never stays. The truth is brutal. Healing requires stability, yet you are still living inside the same internal earthquake that broke you. You drag yourself toward a future you don't fully believe in, terrified to rest in case everything collapses again. Healing becomes a job you can't quit, one where the performance review is always not enough. If the fight to get better destroys what little strength you have left, how do you know the difference between healing and hemorrhaging? Would you notice if you had already crossed that line? Psychology identifies this as self-imposed social withdrawal. You tell yourself solitude is sacred, that independence is strength, yet each day alone chips away at the fragile scaffolding of your mind. Isolation feels safe because the world cannot harm you there, yet safety is only a shadow, a cage disguised as freedom. Every unshared thought becomes a ghost, echoing louder in the hollow spaces of your psyche. You seek understanding, yet you hide from it, as if being seen would shatter the delicate construct of survival you have built. Connection terrifies you, but disconnection slowly devours you, leaving a shell that remembers pain but forgets warmth. You convince yourself this is choice, yet your brain knows it is punishment. If every barrier you build to protect yourself becomes the architecture of your loneliness, can you distinguish safety from imprisonment? Would you dare step outside when the walls themselves feel like life? Cognitive psychologists call it ruminative thought cycles. Your mind spins endlessly, replaying mistakes, reinterpreting interactions, inventing new failures to punish yourself with. Each reflection is a mirror, angled to reveal flaws you didn't know existed. A hall of mirrors where no exit ever appears. You read self-help books, watch tutorials, take courses, each offering a glimmer of guidance. Yet the more you try to correct yourself, the louder the inner critic becomes. Progress becomes proof of inadequacy. If you truly understood, you wouldn't need improvement at all. Every attempt to better yourself loops back into judgment, creating an internal echo chamber with no windows, no doors, no escape. The cycle feels inevitable, like gravity, pulling you toward the same mental cliff over and over. If every effort to heal feeds the voice telling you it's never enough, how do you know when self-awareness ends and self-torture begins? Would you even survive noticing the line? Psychodynamic theory calls it the idealized self, a ghost version of you that haunts every attempt at growth. You compare your current existence to the person you believe you were supposed to become. Braver, louder, happier, unscarred. That imaginary self follows you like a silent judge, reminding you of paths you didn't take, risks you avoided, dreams you buried under survival. Healing forces you to admit that you lost years to fear and chaos, and nothing can ever restore the time stolen by trauma. You scroll through other people's victories while cataloging your own perceived failures, constructing a narrative where you are always behind, always late, always less. You try to forgive yourself, but the ghost keeps asking, why weren't you stronger? The most painful part is knowing you cannot answer. If the person you wish you were will always overshadow the person you are, how do you stop grieving a life you never lived? Would healing mean killing that ghost or yourself? Social psychologists warn about upward social comparison, the tendency to measure your worth against others' curated lives. You scroll, you watch, you listen, and every glimpse of someone else's progress becomes a needle in your chest. Achievement, beauty, love, stability all appear effortless in others while you wrestle with chaos you cannot name. Even in solitude, the comparisons persist internally. Your mind conjures imagined critics, friends, mentors, strangers, all pointing out your insufficiency. Self-improvement becomes a contest you can never win, a cruel mirror where others' successes highlight your stagnation. You try to ignore it, rationalize it, distract yourself, yet the feeling lingers, subtle, corrosive, relentless, reminding you that you are behind, always behind. Every attempt to heal is measured against an invisible, unattainable standard. If the world itself becomes a yardstick of your failure, how do you ever measure progress for yourself? Would you recognize achievement if it arrived unnoticed? Self-help culture glorifies independence, yet psychologists warn that solitary recovery often intensifies isolation and guilt. You are told that the only person who can truly heal you is yourself, and the message settles like a weight on your chest. Every setback becomes a moral failing rather than a systemic or developmental consequence. Therapy, reflection, journaling, meditation all are reframed as personal accountability tests rather than tools. You measure your progress not by growth, but by your ability to endure suffering silently. The mantra, "You are your own solution," becomes a cage, locking you inside your mistakes and memories. Asking for help feels like surrender, and surrender is unthinkable because strength is defined by what you endure alone. If every attempt to heal is judged by your solitary endurance, how do you know whether you are making progress or merely surviving in a more exhausting way? Would relief always feel like weakness? Clinical studies on learned helplessness reveal that repeated failure or trauma conditions the mind to expect disappointment, to anticipate collapse. Each attempt at self-improvement chips away at hope, leaving a brittle framework that cracks under the slightest stress. You cling to strategies, schedules, affirmations, yet the mind, trained by past pain, anticipates defeat before it occurs. Even small victories feel provisional, temporary, like borrowed time. Healing is reframed as a fragile experiment with no guarantee, every success shadowed by the memory of inevitable failure. You begin to doubt whether change is possible at all, or if life is just an endless rehearsal for disappointment. Optimism itself becomes a risk, a threat you cannot afford. If hope is conditioned to fail before it can exist, how can you trust even fleeting moments of relief? Would you recognize freedom if it dared to arrive uninvited? Metacognition, the act of thinking about thinking, can be a double-edged sword. You observe your thoughts, analyze your behaviors, track your emotions, all in an effort to heal. Yet each layer of observation becomes a lens that distorts rather than clarifies. You catch yourself judging your own judgment, fearing your own analysis, questioning the validity of your feelings. Healing demands reflection, but reflection loops endlessly, a hall of mirrors where insight and anxiety merge. The mind becomes both student and teacher, victim and tormentor. Every thought of progress is shadowed by the awareness of how fragile that progress might be. You are trapped in a recursion where self-awareness feeds self-doubt, and self-doubt fuels obsessive self-awareness. If every attempt to understand yourself only magnifies your unease, can introspection ever lead to clarity, or is it designed to keep you lost? Would you dare step outside the loop if it meant leaving the safety of familiar torment? Behavioral psychologists describe illusory control, the mind's desperate attempt to impose order on an inherently unpredictable world. You plan, schedule, optimize, micromanage your thoughts and habits, believing that mastery over small actions shields you from the inevitable collapse of everything else. Yet the more control you seek, the more chaos finds ways to seep through cracks you didn't know existed. Healing demands surrender to forces you cannot predict, yet surrender feels like annihilation. Every meticulous ritual, every rigid rule becomes a fragile dam against uncertainty. You are trapped between the terror of chaos and the futility of control, exhausting yourself trying to stay afloat in a storm that cannot be tamed. If control is an illusion and chaos is unavoidable, how do you navigate life without collapsing, or do you collapse the moment you let go? Would you recognize freedom if it arrived naked and untamed? Psychology teaches that information alone rarely heals. You read endlessly about trauma, self-improvement, mental health, hoping that understanding will mend the fractures inside. Each article, study, or book offers clarity, yet clarity becomes another layer of awareness that emphasizes your suffering instead of alleviating it. Knowledge reassures you that your pain is normal, universal even, but normalization does not equal relief. You feel the irony. The more you know about the mechanisms of healing, the more acutely you perceive your own failures. Insight becomes a double-edged sword, illuminating patterns while leaving the raw ache untouched. The mind accumulates facts, but the heart remains unhealed. If understanding magnifies rather than soothes, what is the purpose of knowledge? Would awareness itself be another form of imprisonment, or the prelude to collapse? Behavioral psychologists identify self-optimization obsession as a subtle form of compulsion. You chase better habits, stronger routines, deeper insights, faster results, believing each tweak will finally close the gap between who you are and who you should be. Every small gain is swallowed by the awareness of infinite possibilities still unmet. Progress becomes a drug, each achievement a temporary high that leaves you craving more, never satisfied. The self you are building feels like a phantom, one that recedes the closer you approach it. Healing becomes a treadmill with no destination, a loop where the chase itself is both the medicine and the poison. You cannot stop improving, yet you cannot remember why it should matter when. Exhaustion shadows every victory. If the pursuit of better becomes indistinguishable from self-punishment, how do you know when you are truly healing or merely chasing a ghost? Would you dare stop, knowing emptiness waits at the finish line? You have traced the contours of your own mind, layer by layer, only to discover that each insight fractures another part of yourself. The child within still waits, wounded and unacknowledged. The coping mechanisms that once protected you now suffocate you. Every habit, every thought, every reflection loops back into the same spiral, feeding itself in recursive torment. Healing promised clarity, yet clarity reveals how much remains unseen, unprocessed, unhealed. You sought to mend, and instead you stare into the abyss of your own construction, where knowledge, effort, and endurance dissolve into exhaustion. The truth is unbearable. You are both the healer and the patient, the oppressor and the oppressed, trapped in a system of your own making. Nothing offers absolution. Nothing offers release. And every attempt to escape folds back upon itself, deeper, darker, endless. If there is no end to this recursive descent, if every step forward is a mirror reflecting the same wounds, can you ever truly know yourself? Or are you condemned to orbit your own collapse forever?